Hi, and welcome to the KindlED Podcast, where we dig into the art and science behind kindling the motivation, curiosity, and mental well-being of the young humans in our lives.
Together, we'll discover practical tools and strategies you can use to help kids unlock their full potential and become the strongest version of their future selves.
Welcome to KindlED. Hi, Adriane. How are you?
I am really good. I have been able to get into lots of micro schools lately because I go in and take pictures. Every time I go into a micro school, I'm just blown away with just not only our learning model and what the kids are learning, but just seeing like this culture that is created. Do you know what I mean? I will tell you more. So I was just at a micro school. I got there, and right when I walked in, the guide ran up to the door and she's like, something just happened, with a student. The other students are a little upset. So she went out with one that was having the challenges. And so I was inside with these 9 students that I've never met before. And I came prepared to teach a lesson on photography. I also happened to have a handout for calming your nervous system. So instead of doing the photography lesson, I was just like, you know what? These girls are crying hysterically. And a couple of the boys were just kind of, you could tell, retreated and just not talking and just seemed really shut down. So we all sat in a circle, and without me doing anything, they all just grabbed hands with each other and they started doing deep breaths. And then one girl would start crying again. And one of her friends would come over and just give her a hug. And I just sat there. I was giving them tools, and we were going over different ways to calm yourself and doing this prepared lesson that I came. But I didn't even need it because these students, just the community that they have created over this school year was absolutely incredible. Because I feel like I was reflecting on this, that when I was in school, there was a child that had gotten hurt and it was really traumatic. We were all just told to go back into the classroom, get out our workbooks, we weren't even allowed to process, first of all, what happened, but also be there for that child. It was just kind of like, okay, get back to work. Whereas this was like, no, we're going to sit and we're going to talk about our emotions. We're going to talk about our feelings. We went around the room and I had told them, I said, whenever we state how we're feeling, we do what Dan Siegel says is name it to tame it. So let's name our feelings, and we're going around, but instead of just naming their feelings, they kind of started talking about other feelings and other stories of why they feel that way. And you could just see on every single one of these students' faces showing up with so much empathy and so much care. I just left. I got my car and I think I just cried. It was just so beautiful.
That is awesome. Wow. I love that those kids are getting that experience where they're seen as individuals and like can participate and like show up as their full selves. Which reminds me of our guest. Who are we talking to today?
We are talking to Garrett Smiley. So he is the co-founder of Sora Schools, which is an education startup based in Atlanta. It's a virtual project-based middle school now and high school where students explore their interests, learn however is best for them, and gain exposure to future careers and fields of work. We cannot wait to talk to Garrett. Garrett Smiley, we are so excited you are here today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I did a little research on your background, and I am super fascinated by how you got into this work. Could you share with our listeners how you got into Sora and non-traditional education and what you're doing today, which we'll talk in a little bit about?
Sure. The quick version is that I got into education by being an unhappy student. I was not one of those people who loved school so much that I just couldn't wait to be a teacher, which I know it's great. That's common, but that was not my journey. I identify as one of the first internet generations. So right in middle and high school is when YouTube and Khan Academy and all those things started to become a thing. And so really it was just absurd to me from a pretty young age why education worked the way it did, right? From my perspective, my teacher was standing up there and impersonating a YouTube video for 99% of their time, right? I'd rather you record this and show it to me later. So it was just some very basic thoughts, very naive thoughts like this. I guess they're somewhat profound. They still drive me to some degree today, that got me into this work. And plus, I was a military brat growing up. So I went to a lot of different schools. I experienced lots of different flavors of education, from hippie schools in Seattle to, prep religious schools in Central Texas. So I experienced the whole spectrum. And I guess the enduring lesson of that was no one's really figured it out. There's lots of different ways to do education, and there's not agreement by any means. So I just got really interested. How is the internet going to impact education? How do I, as someone with access to the internet, self-educate, use these tools to the best of my ability? Those basic thoughts is what drove me into this industry. And then in college, I launched an education nonprofit where we're teaching financial literacy and life skills with some game-based learning, similar ethos to what we do at Sora. And that just proved to me, without a doubt, that there was something there. Traditional education just doesn't work for a lot of students, right? But there isn't a different approach that's a realistic option for many of them. So Sora's whole mission is how do we bring an innovative, more future-focused approach to education to everyone at a price point that's not the $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year private school that many schools that look and feel like Sora often cost.
Part of your story that I think is really fascinating that I would love for our listeners to hear is even a little bit before Sora is your nonprofit that you had with your sister and the real life education that you got through that process.
Oh, you did proper research. I see. You weren't joking. Yeah, so that was nothing huge. Me and my sister, when I think I was 12 and she was 14, again, just idealistic kids. We're like, why don't people have things that we have? Right? Just super basic thoughts like clean water. What? People don't have that. So we just began this fundraising journey, and we were trading our cuteness for donation dollars, basically. But we ended up raising, I think, tens of thousands of dollars by the end of it. We built three and a half wells. That's a story for a different time. And I just saw the small enduring lessons from this. The enduring lesson from this one was that I, as a young person who is willing to work hard, can help real people, right? The world is not as complicated as people often believe. The world, what's the Steve Jobs quote? The world is made by people who are no smarter than you are, right? And I just felt that from a very young age. So I think that was the biggest lesson from this nonprofit, and also just how fulfilling it is to solve a genuine problem that someone has. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Helping kids have an authentic audience and feel like their work is real work and not fake work is just a game changer for kids.
Absolutely.
Right? I want to hear more about Sora. Tell us kind of what it is and how do you go about really empowering learners or kindling curiosity, motivation, kind of all of that stuff. How do you get that job done?
Ooh, because of the way you ended the question, I'll frame this a little differently for this podcast. I think the main problem in education is that it's purposeless. I think it's devoid of all meaning. Most students, and this was my experience, absolutely. I actually played the game of school quite well. I got aced the test I needed to, but the whole time it felt like I had a giant stick being waved above my head, and that was the only thing that motivated me, right? It's like, I will beat you up if you don't do this homework, and that was basically it. I had no idea what I was learning, why it had any intrinsic value, where it can be used, nor did I even retain it for any meaningful amount of time after the test, right? So I think a lot of students are in this they feel like I'm doing this because an adult told me so. I genuinely don't know why, but this is a game I have to play that's a stepping stone to what I've been taught to value in society, right? I think that is a gigantic problem, especially in 2023, where the internet is there. Education is not a content problem. Any sufficiently motivated student can become anything. Any sufficiently motivated person can become anything, right? So education instead, from my perspective, and this is what Sora is hoping to solve, education should help students care about things. That is the number one goal of an education. So how do we do that? First and foremost, we have what educators would call an interdisciplinary inquiry-based education. So what this means is we give our students, yes, you still have to complete the graduation requirements. You still have to demonstrate, we do it differently. We call them units and abilities, but you still have to learn about the US Constitution and World War II and FOIL and mathematics, right? You still have to learn that stuff. However, how you choose to demonstrate mastery over those things is entirely up to you. So that's where at Sora we attack that common question we get in middle and high school, which is, when am I ever going to need to know this, right? When am I ever going to use this? Common question, I'm sure we've all heard. We go right at that because students are opting into learning experiences that are things like, how do we fix our oceans? Or or like the science of Marvel, or how do you build a Martian society, right? They're opting into things that are embedded in the real world inquiry, context, problem, curiosity, right? And so our learning supports the answering of those questions, the proposal of those solutions. So immediately it feels relevant, right? And connected to my interests. I know I'm doing this because this is also an important thing. The students chose to be there. How often do students like, this is stupid. I don't want to do this. I was forced to be here. The second you say, would you like this? To do it this way, or that way? At some level now, the conversation becomes, you're here because you chose to be here. Like, do you like wasting your own time? Why are you here, right? Why are you grumbling? You chose to be here. So that's just a really powerful paradigm shift that's at the heart of Sora. And plus some other powerful things we do, like mastery-based assessment, so students can always try again. Failure is simply a point of feedback to improve in the future. Genuinely, most schools say that, but like, if you fail, your future is ruined in traditional school, right? So mastery-based assessment is huge. And also just this relationship-led school, which I know you all do often as well, where every student has an advisor who they know and trust. 97% of our students actually in our last survey said they have at least one adult faculty member who they would trust with a personal or academic question. So that's a huge win, right? Building those trusting relationships. There's plenty more I can talk about, but I'll stop there.
Do you have a specific process that helps the students discover their passions? Because I know it's set up for that, but what if a student comes in and doesn't even know what they're interested in, or they've been schooled in this traditional way and haven't had the agency to discover what their passions or interests are?
Totally. Not their fault, nor is it the fault of any adult who's listening to this, because I think that's the problem of this generation. I think it's like a meaning crisis. What do I care about? Why do I do the things that I do, right? Am I just in my perpetual motion machine? I was kicked in one direction. I just kind of continue to do that without thinking.
Yeah, cog in a wheel.
Exactly. I think a lot of people feel that way. And I think traditional education is a huge part of that. So what we do at Sora is we expect when you join Sora, you don't know what you're passionate about, right? You don't know what you care about. You don't know what's important and valuable in the world and in your life, and that's totally okay, right? So the advisor relationship that each student has, it's a maximum of 17-to-1 ratio. So these advisors know the student super well, and they just begin the conversation. What are your values? Even if you can't articulate them, what are the choices that you make on a day-to-day basis? What does that say about your values, right? So that's kind of the relationship SEL element, but then it immediately comes in contact with our academics, because starting the second cycle, which is just 6 weeks into your time at Sora, you are choosing which learning experiences you want to do, right? So do you want to do I'll use the examples I just used, like the science of Marvel, or do you want to build a Martian society, right? And plus, there's way more than that. We have 450 learning experiences that kick off every 6 weeks. So why did you choose the one you chose? What are your interests that led you here? What does that say about you? What's interesting to you about those things? So just by the choices students are making when we put them in charge of crafting their learning journey says a lot about themselves. And to answer your question directly, how we cultivate that motivation and interest long term, I think it's just like this constant investigation. Why do I make the choices that I make? And then throwing spaghetti at the wall. Let's try a bunch of things. And by the end of your 7 years at Sora, you will care about things, right? You will go to college, or you will go to your first job. You will go knowing at least 4 or 5 things that genuinely matter to you. I think is the biggest possible win you come out of school feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do this work at Prenda as well, purpose work, to help kids find meaning before we ask them to learn. It's almost like we demand that they be able to articulate why they're learning something before they engage in the learning.
I love that.
Because that's where all their motivation and like the push comes through, because learning's hard. You have to do really intense things, like
Yeah.
it takes focus. You got to stick with things. Like it's hard work. And the thing that we've discovered is that humans love things that are hard. Humans love challenges. Humans
Yeah.
love solving problems. And so it's really it's not the pursuit of like trying to master information. It's really falling in love with a problem. helping you either, like we were talking about literacy before, and like my passion is that I hate illiteracy really bad. And like it's like a very like my passion isn't like, oh, I just enjoy blah blah blah. It's like, no, I hate something and I'm super driven to destroy it, essentially. Passion can be found in a multiplicity of places. We just need to invite kids to think about it and to give them time and space to think about that.
I love that. The story I often give that makes it very real to people, well, there's two. I'll start with the very simple one, which is it's all about expectations and it's all about your belief layer. And what I mean by that is it sounds cerebral, but it's really not. If you think you were about to drink a cup of water, but really it's milk in that bottle, you are going to be quite upset, right? Possibly sick to your stomach. But if you knew it was milk, most people would be like, delicious, right? So it's really all about the expectations that we have. And I think the other analogy, which is perhaps a better one from a different perspective, if anyone's ever run or played a sport that was like physically taxing, at the end of it, when you cross the finish line or the whistle blows or whatever, and you're done, if you felt that way in the middle of the night, you would think you were dying. It would probably be the worst experience of your life, right? And rightly so. Like that would be a medical emergency if you felt that way in the middle of the night, right? Why isn't that the worst experience of our life? Because we know why we're doing it. There's a meaning attached to it. There's a context. There's expectations that it's going to feel that way. So much of life, I love that you said that. So much of life is, what are the struggles that are worth struggling for? What's the meaning behind this? And if you think it's worth it, the struggle, you actually imbue it with this meaning and it starts to feel joyful. Like that's where fulfillment's not like, yes, dopamine and happiness is like a part of life that people will chase, but like fulfillment is something much deeper and it's only at the end of suffering. Sorry, that became more cerebral than I intended, but having the students feel that is so important.
I'm just like taking a minute to process all of that. That's so good. So what kind of blockers do you see, like do you experience as an education leader that make empowering young humans more difficult? Like what gets in your way from doing this work?
I'll say two things. One is that students are not used to this, right? School thus far, likely their relationship with school is that it's a game, it's a hoop to jump through. The easiest I can make these hoops to jump through, the better, right? Because it's a game. I'm gaming this, I'm maximizing reward to effort. That's how humans think about games, right?
It's incredibly logical. Like sometimes we think like, oh, if you give kids choices, they won't do anything. It's like, well, actually, they're just making incredibly logical decisions. Like if you give them book options to read and the goal is get an A, clearly they're going to choose the bare minimum amount of effort and choose the easiest goal. And then we're going to criticize them for not challenging themselves. It's like, well, actually, you set up a world for me where challenging myself didn't make sense. And that's on us. That's not on them.
I love that. That was such a good way to say that. That's completely right. That's completely right. That's how I think about it as well. What's the other variable? Let's connect this conversation to the conversation we were just having. What's the other variable we can introduce in the system? It's meaning. Why are we doing this? I did not go to the gym for a very, very, very long time until somebody made a logical argument for why this was so important, and now I do it. And I love it because again, I imbue each of those, that I imbue that pain with the progress I'm making, right? Now it's fun to some degree. And that's how we have to make learning feel for students. You are never going to make learning easy. And as long as we make it feel like that logical trade-off where you're trying to get maximum reward for the least amount of effort, which is again how 99% of students feel, I would say, as long as that's the way it's framed, they're going to continue to do this. And it's also impossible to win as educators. It's impossible to win because to some level, it's convincing students to do difficult internal work. It's like, imagine if school was about the number of like, I don't know, bench press reps you do. Students will choose the lightest weight and they'll nail it and they'll go, actually, I did 15, not 12. I won objectively, right? But really it's about maximizing your personal struggle because that's where maximum growth comes from. So how to get students to engage in the same project that you're trying to get them to engage with in educators? Well, you need to come at it from the same perspective from, first and foremost.
We've been talking a lot about intrinsic motivation as well. So can you break down a little bit how that plays a role in this type of learning? And as we're talking about blockers with what your blocker has been, but there's probably a lot of blockers for students as well, beliefs, mindsets, things like that. How can you tap more into this intrinsic motivation to help that not be something that's in their way?
Depends how we're talking about intrinsic motivation. Sometimes I feel like it's actually harmful when it enters the conversation in the way that a lot of educators talk about it. They talk about it like either I love it for the pure joy of the like imagine you're a scientist and you're a Nobel winning physicist. Are they only valid if they're doing it just because they like love numbers so much that they can't help? But no, of course, to some level, even Nobel Prize winning physicists who love their jobs are doing it because that Nobel Prize money's nice, and it's also my job to feed my family, and also like there's layers of meaning in everything that we do. And I actually think it's not helpful to pretend like money's a crude one, but that's what came to mind first. Like it's weird to think that money or taking care of my family or my health or even my like happiness in the moment or all of these aren't built into it as well, because they are, right? And I actually think I have a concept I call integrated motivation, or sometimes I call it the Venn diagram of motivation, where it's about layering as many Venn diagram bubbles, like finding the intersection and layering as many of them as possible. Because then when one fails, like if a student's just doing school because like their parents just told them it's either you're a doctor or I don't love you anymore, right? Which is unfortunately what a lot of students feel like. The second you no longer respect your parents, that one gigantic motivator, your only one, as soon as it's gone, your motivation completely fails, right? So it's about how much meaning can I embed into this activity from as many perspectives as possible, where even if my parents' love is no longer relevant to me, I'm still in love with this idea of helping patients. I think the doctor is the analogy I use. Helping patients. And I love this idea of the challenge of understanding the human body, and the money is super nice as well. Like you just have to layer it and put as many tentacles into their sense of personal purpose as possible.
So it's not just the intrinsic motivation, but it's layered with all these extrinsic motivators too, which Kaity and I dove really deep into all the different types of motivation. So I love how you weren't just like, oh yeah, it's about intrinsic motivation, because there's lots of layers, and just the visualization of the tentacles and the Venn diagrams, I feel like that will really resonate with parents as well as students in knowing how to get to their purpose and what the whole point of all of this is.
I love that. And why I feel like it's not helpful, because it's almost like shaming parents out of certain motivation that they can use. I agree, like the Sawyer effect of motivating students extrinsically with things that they're already intrinsically motivated in. I understand the research, but there's also a long history. I fell in love with reading biographies when I was a very young kid. And I remember there were at least 3 or 4 that are even coming to mind now, including Steve Jobs, where their first foray into independent learning was because their parents bribed them to read, and that actually happened with me as well. My dad is not paying me anymore to read all the books that I read, but along the process, I fell in love with it, and I found stronger Venn diagram bubbles, right? Where even if that one failed, it fell away. It doesn't matter anymore.
This is great. So if you are listening and you want to know more about this, you can listen to episode 4, where Adriane and I do a deep dive on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And we come to this exact same conclusion, where extrinsic motivation is not wrong or bad, but you can experience different types of motivation with varying levels of autonomy. So if that kid wants to be a doctor because they want to help people, or just for any other reason, then I just love it, right? Like becoming a doctor is super hard. You're not going to love every time you're staying up till 3 a.m. studying for a test in college. Like you're not going to like relish that, and that's okay. It's that you own the purpose. It's not someone else's purpose that you're trying to serve. And as the sooner we can hand those things over to kids, the better. And I love what you said about your dad bribing you to read, because some kids have that experience where they like, it's kind of like a egg on the top of the roof, like which way is it going to roll when you do that? Because it's like, yeah, I'm so happy that you chose to fall, or like that you happen to fall in love with it and the egg rolled this way. And then so many other kids are like, oh, the money's gone, not interested, right? So it's just something to be aware of, nothing to like demonize or take off the table, right? We just want to be aware of all of the different levels of motivation and methods, and kind of be able to use them judiciously and to help kids master them themselves. I think I gave the example in the other episode about how I used to bribe myself with chocolate chips. It'd be really weird if my teacher was bribing me with chocolate chips as a grad student, but yet we do that to very young kids. It's like, what it isn't really the principle is the same, young kid or teenager or adult. It's just a matter of respect and like dignity to allow a human to find their own motivation for doing something or not doing something. So what are the other blockers that you see in kids? I feel like there's, or parents even, like what's the parent journey like coming to Sora? Do you do any like parent education or helping kind of recalibrate expectations for parents?
Yeah, most of our marketing and admissions is actually geared to parents because I think students get it pretty quickly. They don't love school. Maybe if they're a junior or senior, they feel like it's like sunk cost fallacy. I've been in it so long, I'm not going to leave now. But for the average middle schooler, outside of friends, they get it, right? And they're actually quite keen to join Sora once they hear about it. It's the parents who are like, what will my friends think? Does this close doors to their colleges? Does it, right? All the super logical things that parents think. And this is just the challenge. Is you all are innovators in education too. This is the challenge. How do we bridge that gap? How do we say there's a beautiful vision over here and we understand that this is the way, this is all you've known. This is likely the way you were schooled. This is likely the way your parents were schooled. It's likely the way you've been schooling your kid up to this date. So jumping ship feels like you're the first person in the world to do it, but you're not. This is the pathway. This is why we think it's better. So yes, we absolutely educate parents this way, but I think we have something really cool going for us post-COVID. And I don't think this is just a Sora thing. I think Prenda probably experienced this as well. It's just not weird anymore to choose an alternative path. A lot of parents, they before it was like crippling social anxiety for some. How will I be seen if I'm that homeschooling parent or if my kid, attends an online school? People just get it now that there are different options. Some, right, in some circles. Some circles just get it that there isn't one size fits all. And so I think Sora's cool factor has increased significantly so that now they don't feel like a social pariah for making the jump.
Yes, I remember we started Prenda before the pandemic, and I was like just the weird mom at the park that was talking about this. And then like suddenly COVID hit, and I'm like, no, I'm the coolest mom at the park.
Yeah, I had a similar story. Yeah, we started Prenda January 2020, and my husband was just like, what are you doing? We're going to be, like the weird homeschoolers, or I don't even know what, that's not real school. And then COVID hit literally 3 months later, and I was brilliant. He was like, you knew. How did you know that everyone was going to be doing school in people's homes? You did this. How did you know this? And then it just became more of a norm. But I even just looking at what Sora does and just this mindset and just this different paradigm around educating and, like you said, utilizing these experiences. Is that what you call them?
Expeditions, you're saying our classes?
Expeditions. There you go. Yes, your expeditions and your classes. Because I was even thinking, I have a homeschooler and he's really into video games, and I struggle with the video game, and he gets very obsessive and very addicted. He has similar behaviors to what drug addicts sometimes, and he just gets like rages.
Oh, I know it well. I was
Yes. But what's interesting is just last week, he just got Mario Kart for the Switch. And he not only, okay, I'm going to go play Mario Kart, he printed out this big long list, I don't even know where he got it from, of all the stats of the vehicles and the characters. And it had like exactly like how fast they are. I don't even know what the numbers meant. And he spent hours doing data analysis to figure out the absolute best combination for the character and the type of car. And then he's like telling his brothers, and he's so excited about it. I was like, okay, this is still learning. All those video games is still learning. So I kind of feel like this is the same kind of concept of what you're doing at Sora. You're taking these interests and these passions that these students have, and then you're turning it into more of this deeper, richer education.
Yeah, I love that. I can't pretend that some knowledge isn't more nutritious than other knowledge. I think sometimes there's value to be gained in almost anything if we reflect on it properly. That's like the experiential learning philosophy, but certainly not the same amount of value, right? So I won't say that we can build an entire curriculum around video games. However, I was a teenage boy at some point too, so I understand that struggle very, very well. But it's not to say that this doesn't teach you something about at the very least your personality and likely your interest and perspective on the world as well. Like if your son really enjoys something like that, perhaps data is something that really moves them forward, right? Maybe it's this game about optimizations or just solving problems, or maybe it is that competitive spirit or that constant feel of self-improvement. Maybe they play for 12 hours a day because they can feel themselves getting better in a way that they don't experience in any other aspect of their life. So I do think interrogating these behaviors is a beneficial starting point, but I wouldn't say it's the end by any means. So at Sora, what we try to do is creating curriculum is hard. We believe it's hard. Some people disagree with us, but we think creating engaging learning experiences, nutritious engaging learning experiences is difficult. So what we do is we craft all of these expeditions and activities, we call them, that students can choose from. And so they are relevant to the real world, building Martian society, science of survival, right? Like these things that have hooks that students will be interested in. However, if the student just has this thing they're on fire about and they're willing to map it back to credit. So if they're willing to say, I'm going to do a proper like algebra project around this data of Mario Kart, if you're willing to propose it and get it approved, we'll assign you an advisor and you can work on that for 6 weeks, and we will give credit at the end if it's rigorous enough, right? So we totally meeting the students where they're at, but unlike some progressive educators, I won't pretend like playing Minecraft is a substitute for math, right? I know it's not even trivializing it that much. Some people just genuinely believe that.
So let's talk about this idea. So progressive education, just for our listeners, is kind of the idea that kids should have more choice. It doesn't really matter like that they memorize facts and things like that. It's come in and out of vogue in the education stratosphere over the course of many decades, and you kind of saw it come to a head in like the 90s, and then we had this big back to basics like flow where we had a lot of charter schools and uniforms and drill and kill. Like it's like a pendulum that just swings back and forth in the education world, and I don't know why we have not figured out that it's the middle. It's like, yes, choices, also yes, rigor. So how do you see that kind of that pendulum or the spectrum of autonomy, and how do you map rigor onto purpose and choice?
Wonderful question. Yeah, that's what we say at Sora. It's the third option. Like, I know you didn't give us 3 options, but we're not a traditional school. We're not a progressive school. We think there's something to learn from both. However, I think the macro structure of learning, the progressive educators got it way more correct. I think asking students what they care about and then trying to personalize learning around that, leading from meaning, purpose, what we've been talking about, instead of here's what's good and nutritious for you, do it, or I'm going to hurt you, like emotionally or otherwise. I think that is a way healthier approach to the design of school. However, some things are just way better to learn than other things. There's some progressive educators who are like the inherent mathematical value of dance, right? Dance is something great to learn, but it's no substitute for the mental models of algebraic and mathematical reasoning. It's a totally different thing. So of course, what we do at Sora is, I actually think, pretty uncommon. Prenda gets very close to this, probably closer than anyone else I know, but it's about, you have to learn these things that are very helpful for you in your future. However, how you demonstrate those things is up to you, right? So here's the constraint, but how you get there and even what order you get there in is up to you. And the reason most schools don't do this, the reason there is this false choice from my perspective, that either it's structured rigor or, shoes optional progressive school, the reason I think that false dichotomy exists is because tracking student individual learning plans is genuinely difficult. Like, it's genuinely difficult if you just have to do it by hand. How do I know Jamie hasn't learned this thing yet that Rebecca has learned, right? It's like, how am I supposed to even keep track of, if there's 100 different things the students have to learn and they're all going in their own order, how the heck am I supposed to remember that, right? So I think there is a genuinely difficult, like, engineering problem, if you will, at the heart of this issue. However, software is really helpful here, right? Most school does not have, for all intents and purposes, helpful software. They have paperwork that was moved online for organizational purposes, but they don't have any new functionality that computers give them. And I know, Brenda, because Kelly's shown me your software. I know you all do the same thing. You have software that tracks what every student's learning plan. We see how they're progressing. Every student is in their own spot. Computers are very good at data organization and making recommendations on data, right? Pathfinding. Here's all these data points that you as a human wouldn't even be able to hold in your head, and here's the best path forward. So yeah, I think this gives us superpowers, having this capability.
Absolutely. In many ways, this type of education that we're proposing hasn't been even possible. Like the closest you could get is having like a one-on-one tutor, but it's like, okay, well, that has not been, we don't have one-on-one tutors for everyone. So it developed systems that do the best we can with what we have. And now we have something different. We have a tool and we're kind of replicating the system into software instead of fundamentally altering the systems that we use to educate, because that's what we're used to, instead of fundamentally like reimagining what it could be in light of new technology and new assets. And you see this a lot. We partner with like dozens of educational technology companies and bring a ton of tools to the fingertips of these kids. And so that means that we evaluate way more than we actually end up partnering with, right? And so most of the tools, most of the way that we're using technology today is for teachers to assign and grade and compare a set of content knowledge, right? So it doesn't allow for individual paths or inquiry. It doesn't assume you want that, right? Because it doesn't assume that's possible. But in this other world where this is possible, that informs what we want, right? And so we're really just sitting in the, like at this crossroads where we can enable all of this personalization and mastery and inquiry and all of these things. We're a classroom teacher. That's a nightmare. Give me 30 kids and ask me to do that for everyone. Like, no, I can't.
It's not only a nightmare. At some point I got bored and did the math. If every student is going to have let's call it 100 different things they have to learn, and they can learn it in any order they need to learn it in, it's mathematically impossible. Like you would need more paperwork than would stretch from here to the moon. And so that's why we have these, because we've not had any tools to organize information to date in education. Education has evolved under that assumption, and we have all these I was going to call them compression algorithms, but like basically like ways to really simplify the amount of logistic work we have to do as educators, right, over the last 200 years. And we've lost the forest for the trees, where now we are like slaves to the simplifications. But that is not what we were trying to do in the first place, right? Prerequisites exist. Students shouldn't learn calculus before they learn algebra 1, obviously, but there's far less sequential about education than most people think. And I think, if you don't mind, I'll riff on what I think was the core of what you just said. I love that so much. Then what is the purpose of education, right? If it's not about that, and you said mindsets a moment ago, we use that exact same language at Sora. We say mindsets over content. Content is still important, and we actually have a mindset called connection seeking at Sora, which is knowing things and connecting them. Like knowing things is still helpful, but limiting reagent, or another way to say it, like the thing that is the true bottleneck on us and our potential is usually our beliefs about the world. I saw a version of that in the first answer with the milk and the racing thing, right? So it's all about like Einstein wouldn't have been Einstein if he was not curious, right? I don't care how much math the guy knows. There's a lot of people who know just as much math as him, if he wasn't just endlessly curious about this thing, right? Or similarly, the championship winning boxer would not be the championship winning boxer no matter the size of their biceps if they were a Quaker or a pacifist, right? Like it's just your beliefs about the world and how you process information. It informs our outcomes far more than what we know, right? However, traditional education, they hope that those mindsets, those beliefs will be emergent out of what they learn. That's just not how it works. You're not going to teach me calculus and then I'm going to like out of nowhere develop a meaning-making, curious mindset. It's just not going to happen. So at Sora, we talk about working in reverse. The first thing that we do is we're going to go after the students, what they care about, what their mindsets are, how they process information. Do you have a growth mindset? Do you have a fixed mindset? We can talk about the mindsets if you want. And then out of there flows the content we need to accomplish those things, right?
How do you go about developing the curriculum? You said creating the curriculum is hard. So do you do that all internally? Is it you just kind of develop things as you get new students in? I'm just really curious how you go about this curriculum creation process.
Great question. So every time we hire a new educator, their job for the first year of working here, every cycle is to create more curriculum with the curriculum team. So we have experts who help them, but a really cool part of being a relationship-led interdisciplinary education where students are on their own path like us is every educator can bring their passions to the school. And as long as they're tagging it back to the units and the abilities, like the credit that students need to demonstrate, anything that they're passionate about fits into our curriculum, right? So right now we have 450 learning experiences that we've created to date that we make available to the students, but every cycle we're adding new ones, right? So I think that's actually what's really exciting, since we both of our organizations stand for access in education, and trying to scale this sort of third way, as we just called it, right? This middle ground, trying to scale this unique approach to education. What's really exciting about that is, counterintuitively, the bigger that we get as a system, right, both of us, the more personalized we become, because the more resources students have access to, the more pathways and examples they can pull from. And there's a whole thing with relationships and the students getting to know each other that scales with the network as well. So all that to say, the experts, what we call our faculty, they're expected to create these passion-driven learning experiences that tie to our standards. But then we also add that to a library. A student can do it asynchronously on their own time if they want. We also have fully asynchronously designed, and then they can also propose independent study. We're like, it's difficult to make curriculum, but if you want to take a shot at it and get it proposed and go through an iteration or two, go for it. And we actually think that the more independent I'm proposing my learning based on what I care about, we're trying to push students there over their 7 years at Sora. So hopefully when they're juniors and seniors, they're completing capstones, 200-hour projects, sort of thing that originated in their mind.
Where do you find these experts, and are there certain characteristics that you're really looking for? Because you're talking about relationship, which for some people, especially if they came from the education world, that isn't always what comes naturally because it's not trained in them. It's more about compliance and obedience and getting the learning happening to the kids. So are there very specific characteristics that you're looking for in these experts?
Most of our experts to date just came from an independent school where advisory was an expectation. So we've been lucky in that respect. It does make it easier. For the audience, that's been kind of a luxury we've had for the first 4 years of our existence, because Sora has been intentionally small. We capped out at 150 students 2 years ago, and we've kept it from at that point from there. And so we have like a 0.3% acceptance rate for our faculty positions, super low, because people want to work in an interest-driven interdisciplinary school. It's cool, right? Where I get to know and love on kids, amazing. So we get a lot of applications. So we have just been able to cherry pick people who have direct experience with this sort of thing. But our big initiative for the upcoming school year is, how do we turn anyone who loves kids? I think that is like one of the only prerequisites who like genuinely likes kids and the human potential they represent, has this background of expertise and knowledge. How do you turn anyone in that Venn diagram into a world-class Sora educator? And I also think this can come from anywhere in the world. In fact, it ought to. Giving students a global perspective is incredibly valuable, and most schools simply can't do it. A lot of the $60,000 a year independent schools try. They ship teachers in on visa, and they really try to give their students a global experience, but they can't do it at scale. But an online program where our classes, our expeditions, are online by default, even if you're in an in-person Sora space, means we have access to the entire planet of perspective and talent.
I love it when you put it that way. We continue asking questions. I have so many questions, so maybe we'll have to have you on another time. We ask this question to all of our guests, so we're going to wrap it up. Who is someone who has kindled your love of learning, curiosity, motivation, or passion?
I think it goes back to my community. If we talk about like the connected learning philosophy, and who is my community that inspired me to reach for ever higher resources, they were rarely in-person people, right? they were people I knew of. They were biographies I read. They were, I think, YouTube and these resources that, again, I was one of the first YouTube generations. I think I had an incredible amount of role models to look to. So to some level, it sounds cheesy, but people like Einstein and Steve Jobs, these some of my favorite biographies I read when I was a kid, they were super formative, and they taught me to, reach higher than I otherwise would, and the inherent value of doing so. Books are great, kids. Read more books. They represent lifetimes of wisdom.
And we won't even pay you to read. No.
Yeah.
So how can listeners learn more about your work?
Just go to soraschools.com. That's plural. Or you can follow me on Twitter at GWSmiles. Sometimes I tweet. Most of the time I don't. So I recommend the website.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a delightful conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.
So that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to KindlED wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review, rate us, or share your favorite episode on social media and tag us at PrendaLearn. For more KindlED content, head on over to prenda.com/KindlED and subscribe to the KindlED newsletter.
And don't forget to submit your questions or challenges by emailing us at podcast@prenda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep kindling.